Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. This is Jack, and tonight I have some new story for you. If you enjoy my videos, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comment. And now, let's begin.
I set the champagne on the roof ledge beside the greenhouse door and stood there for a second with the bottle in one hand and the city spread out in front of me. The light was going fast. Chicago always looked bigger from up here when the sun dropped and the empty windows started holding the last of the sky. The skyline was way off to the north, dim and cold, half dead, half hanging on in scattered blocks where somebody still had power for an hour or two. My part of the city was different. South and east, the streets opened up into warehouses, fenced lots, rail spurs, old service roads, and dead industrial property. Fewer people had lived out here before the outbreak. That was one of the reasons I bought this place. Now it was one of the reasons I was still alive. Bailey was under the greenhouse overhang, watching me and the roof access hatch in turns. She always did that when I stood still too long. She knew when I was thinking instead of working. I popped the cork, poured a little into a plastic cup, and looked over the south side through the open lane between the planter boxes. No movement at the loading yard, no flashlights near the rail cut, no fresh smoke from the machine shop 2 blocks over. The same broken city, the same dead traffic, the same wind moving trash across streets no one cleaned anymore. I raised the cup and drank. 1 year, 365 days since the first sirens never stopped, since the streets clogged, since the news anchors kept repeating the same careful words until the stations dropped out one by one. My name is Warren Pike. I am 48. I own the 7-story brick building under my feet. I bought it 11 years before the outbreak, back when this stretch of the South Deering side was cheap enough for a man with steady cash and low standards for neighborhood charm. It used to be a light industrial property. I converted the middle floors into rental lofts one at a time and left the top 2 for myself. Floors 2 through 5 paid the bills for years. Welders, mechanics, a barber, one guy who sold used restaurant equipment, one woman who rebuilt lamp fixtures, men with bad credit, women leaving bad marriages, people who needed 4 walls and a landlord who fixed things fast and stayed out of their personal life. I kept 6 for work and storage. 7 was home. The roof belonged to me on paper and in practice, and I spent years turning it into something useful. Before the world broke open, I had a YouTube channel with a small but loyal audience. I posted videos about backup power, water storage, urban gardening, layered security, radios, and what to do when city services stop acting like a guarantee. I never sold fantasy. No chest thumping, no fake panic. I showed wiring diagrams, battery chemistry, practical load calculations, sealant failures, weak points in apartment doors, and how long canned food lasts when you stop kidding yourself about rotation. Some people watch to learn, a lot watch to laugh. I used the money anyway. Solar panels, inverters, spare charge controllers, bulk food, common caliber rifles, common caliber pistols, more magazines than any sane suburban neighbor would approve of, cases of ammunition stacked in dry storage, trip lines, smoke grenades, noisemakers, demolition cord and shaped cuts for steel. If it fit a real problem, I bought it, built it, or bartered for it. The building is not a fortress out of a comic book. It is a working structure that I kept alive longer than most people would have managed. That matters more. The first floor is a trap layer and a buffer. The front lobby is blocked with welded mesh, sand drums, broken appliances, and a dead delivery van nose-backed against the inside after I cut through the wall to bring it in. The visible stairwells do not reach the upper floors anymore. I dropped the lower runs in the first month after the outbreak. The outside fire escape used to go all the way to the alley. I cut and dropped the bottom section, then sent the loose steel down with charges when the infected started climbing over each other below it. The upper section hangs there now, twisted and useless, ending over a gap no one crosses without tools, time, and luck. I do not give anybody the chance to line those up. The old freight elevator is the only clean access path from the lower service level to my upper floors. I rebuilt that system myself long before the outbreak. I replaced cables, rewired controls, added a manual brake, and tied the power feed into a locked circuit that stays dead unless I bring it live from above. The public call buttons never worked after I got done with it. The real activation point is inside a caged maintenance vestibule behind a painted steel plate. Fingerprint reader, brass key switch, and a hard mechanical lever. If the electronics fail, the lever still works. If the fingerprint sensor glitches in the cold, the key still works. If all of it burns out, I can lock the cage in place and treat the shaft as dead space. That lift helps me move weight and cuts my exposure on bad days. But it is noisy, and it can trap a man if he trusts it too much. I never forget that. I made one more slow loop around the roof after the drink. The greenhouse door was latched. The rain capture line had not frozen at the lower bend. The solar panels on the west rack had a skin of grey grime and windblown ash I would need to clear in the morning if the weather held. The ultraviolet flood mounts on the north parapet were still aimed where I wanted them, covering the roof hatch lane and the lift housing corner. I run those only when I need the seconds they buy. They drain power fast. They make me visible. Nothing up here gets used for comfort if it costs security. I checked the camera dome above the lift housing, wiped a ring of moisture off the lens with my glove, and looked out over the east side again. Bailey moved with me, quiet and close, ears working every small sound across the roof membrane. I went back down into the 6th floor workshop, sealed the hatch, and crossed to the monitor wall. That room is where I spend most of my waking hours. Metal shelving on both long walls, tools, parts bins, battery chargers, repair trays, a reloading bench bolted into concrete, drone frames hanging from hooks, 3 radios, 2 old laptops stripped down for local use only, hand maps pinned to corkboard with routes marked in pencil and grease pen. The monitor wall itself is a patchwork of old screens and salvaged camera boards tied into a closed system I built after the factory security gear started dying. 12 fixed exterior views, 4 interior corridor views, 2 lift cage cameras, 2 pinhole angles watching the street through vent gaps on the lower floors. Every one of those feeds matters. A blind corner is the sort of problem that stays quiet until the exact second it stops being quiet. The feeds look normal. Lobby dark. South alley empty. Service road clear except for a shopping cart jammed against the curb. The 2nd floor funnel lane still intact. The decoy room on the 4th floor closed up, timer off for now. 5th floor trip net quiet. Lift cage parked at the lower maintenance vestibule with the brake engaged and power off. 1 warning light glowed amber on the 3rd floor sentry lane camera. I leaned closer and saw what it was. The sensor lens had a smear across it. Dust, condensation, or a thread of web. Small problem, but small problems become bigger ones when you stack enough of them. I pulled the maintenance pouch from the pegboard, checked my sidearm, slung the short carbine, and whistled for Bailey. When people hear me say turret, they picture polished metal, software, clean tracking motors, the kind of thing a movie gives a bunker to make a point. Mine are rough, ugly, and useful. 2 fixed defensive mounts in 2 lanes, where intrusion is most likely if someone gets that far. Welded plate housings, narrow firing arcs built around corridor geometry, remote feed boxes, multi-step trigger logic so a rat, a loose panel, or my own dog does not set one off. I learned in the first months that tying a weapon to one motion sensor is a fast way to waste ammunition and punch holes in your own walls. So the system waits for a sequence, pressure strip, infrared brake, trip tension. Then it arms and cycles short controlled bursts downward into a marked lane. I can also switch the automatic part off and run either mount from the 6th floor bench. They jam if I neglect them. Springs wear out, optics cloud, cables loosen. They are not there to solve the whole problem. They are there to buy me a few seconds while I get into position. I went down by the internal stair, stopping at each landing before I touched the next door. Sound moves strangely in this building. Wind gets into one vent shaft and a loose panel rattles on the 4th floor. A cooling pipe ticks in the wall when outside temperature drops fast. One steel plate near the old loading side hums when the gusts hit from the alley. I know every one of those sounds. If something new gets added, I catch it fast or I end up catching it too late. That night the building sounded the way it should. Cold weather, normal vibration from the inverter fans. No extra scrape, no voices, no footsteps where no footsteps belong. I opened into the third-floor service corridor and moved to the sentry lane while Bailey stayed half a step behind my left leg. The amber light was from a dirty lens. I wiped it clean, swapped the spare sensor anyway, and ran a dry test with the lane cold and the firing assembly locked out. Trigger board cycled clean, feed box was fine, magazine count was where I left it. I checked the mounting bolts with the stubby wrench, reset the safety bar, and made a note to strip the housing tomorrow if the morning stayed quiet. Bailey watched the stair breach the whole time with her nose slightly raised and her posture loose. If she had stiffened up, I would have shut the corridor and gone back upstairs. I trust her on close warning more than any camera I own. On the way back, I stopped on the 4th floor and wound the timer on the decoy radio. 10 minutes on every few hours. Low volume shop talk from an old recording. Useless conversation about carburetors, but from the hall, it sounds like life. A curious man follows that noise deeper. A desperate man follows it faster. I ate in the workshop with the west observation slot open. Beans, dried beef, onions, and a little rice from a batch I made earlier. Bailey got her share first. I sat on the stool with the bowl in one hand and binoculars in the other, watching the service road and the rail berm while I chewed. A lot of the city's danger comes from men who think they are being careful. They move in 2s and 3s, keep low, use back lanes, and make good decisions for 20 minutes, then ruin the whole effort with one loud door, one flashlight sweep through the wrong window, one argument in the open. I had seen it happen all year. Last November, a scavenger crew tried to hold out in the warehouses west of the transfer yard. They had fuel, tools, and a roofline that looked workable. Then one of them started running a drum stove under a cracked skylight. Smoke rose straight up in the cold air. By dusk, loose infected from 3 blocks over were drifting toward them. The men who came out had bags too heavy for speed and lights too bright for dark movement. I watched from the slot until the lights stopped moving. The infected are not complicated once you strip away rumor. Different neighborhoods use different names. Sick, rotters, biters, night ones, runners. It does not change what they do. Fresh bodies move faster and commit harder if they see motion or hear sharp noise. Older ones drag and wander until something wakes them up. Then they lunge in short bursts and lose steam if the ground is bad or the target disappears. Groups build in the same places over and over. Underpasses, shade lines, covered loading bays, dead lobbies with broken glass doors, walkways out of the wind. They are worse after dark. Not all at once. Not all of them. Enough to make night travel a gamble I keep to a minimum. Ultraviolet light does not fix the whole problem. It forces space in close quarters. It makes some of them pull back, flinch, or lose the lane for a second. I use it the way I use smoke, steel, and height. One more tool, not a miracle. I cleaned the compact quad drone after dinner and set it on the launch pad under the north window. 3 working drones, that was my current count. 1 compact quad for close survey and roof checks. 1 larger folding unit with stronger lift. 1 fixed-wing foam job for wider sweeps when the wind behaves. The city destroys drones if I get sloppy. Crosswinds throw them into signs and wire. Cold shortens the batteries. Signal can bounce between steel walls and add a delay that turns a careful turn into a crash. I lose parts, recover parts, and build another one. Same with almost everything now. Use it, wear it down, patch it, use it again. I meant to take the champagne back up after I finished with the drone and do 1 more roof scan before full dark. Then Bailey stood up so fast her nails clicked off the mat, and I knew something outside had changed. She turned toward the east side windows and fixed there, silent. I listened. At first, I caught only the regular building noise and the wind scraping loose plastic against brick somewhere down the block. Then, a low vibration came through the wall, deep, steady for a second, then rough, then stronger. Not a truck. Nothing on these streets had made that sound in months. I crossed to the east observation slot, opened the insulated panel, and looked out over the roofline toward the lakeside. The low clouds held the city glow, dirty orange and grey. Then a shadow moved under the clouds, huge and low enough that I felt the scale of it before I sorted the shape. Wide wings, 4 engines, big transport aircraft, military profile. It came in far too low over the industrial strip, and one side of it was shedding sparks. I grabbed the binoculars and ran for the roof. By the time I hit the parapet, the aircraft had crossed north of me and was angling west, trying to line up with the broad straight cut of an old boulevard that ran through open lots and warehouse rows. Whoever was flying it had picked the only stretch in that direction long enough for a chance at putting it down without clipping high-rise buildings. One engine was burning. The left side looked torn up. The landing gear was not right. Nose too low, tail fighting to stay straight. The aircraft came over the grain facility, dipped, corrected, then hit. Metal scraped pavement in a long, bright line. Sparks spread across the boulevard. The left wing clipped something tall, probably a pole or roof edge, and more fire burst from that side. The plane kept sliding, chewing through debris and abandoned vehicles, then disappeared behind a line of low warehouse roofs in a shower of sparks and burning fragments. The sound reached me in hard layers. Long metal grind, deep impact through the ground, then 3 fast secondary blasts. Bailey backed off the parapet and flattened near the greenhouse door. I stayed down behind the sandbags and kept the binoculars on the impact line. Fire rose in 2 columns above the roofline. For maybe 3 seconds nothing moved that I could pick out. Then, gunfire started. Short controlled burst first, then more, farther apart. Then a white-violet beam flashed low near the wreck and cut out. It came on again, swept left, then dropped. Portable ultraviolet. Somebody at that crash site had come in prepared, or had enough warning to bring the gear after the plane went down. I got the spotting scope into the roof nest and worked the focus until I found the wreck through smoke and broken roof edges. The cargo plane had come apart across at least 2 blocks. The nose had punched into a warehouse office section. The middle fuselage sat across the boulevard, twisted and burning. The tail had broken off farther back. Debris lit the street in patches. Figures moved near the rear section. At first I caught only flashes. One person with a lamp, one firing from cover, another dragging either a body or a gear case. Then more motion started bleeding in from all sides of the district. Not a full swarm, not yet. Single infected and pairs coming out of alleys, service cuts, and beneath trailers where the crash noise had pulled them out. A figure stumbled out of the smoke, moved in a broken rush, and got dropped by 2 fast shots from the survivor line. Fresh turn or burned crewman. Did not matter. The result was the same. I left the scope on the bags, dropped back inside, and went straight to the bench. Monitor wall on, district map pulled down, magnetic route markers in my hand before I sat. The straight road approach to the crash was useless already. Too exposed, too many intersections, too much line of sight for anyone else heading that way, and the noise would keep drawing movement into the center of it. Rooftops and service cuts looked better. I had an old route in my head through a tire shop roof, over a catwalk, down into a sheet metal yard, then through alleys that came at the crash from the south side. It had been months since I used any part of it. Roof conditions change. Doors that were sealed get forced. One bad ladder makes the whole plan slower. I keyed the radio scanner. Static. A clipped voice on one band, too weak to make out. Then hiss again. I launched the compact drone from the north window and sent it east at rooftop height. The drone skimmed over the scrap lot, crossed the rail spur, and moved through smoke toward the wreck. The video feed flickered twice, then cleared. I saw broken glass on roofs, a fresh fire starting inside a warehouse office, and movement building in the alleys. A man on a loading dock pointed a flashlight up toward the drone, then ran inside with 2 others behind him. Not military, wrong gear, wrong reaction. Just nearby scavengers caught close to the impact. Then the wreck itself filled the screen. The cargo plane had split wide. Crates were scattered near the rear. One large hardened case lay partly under bent metal, still attached to a torn sling. 3 people near it were moving with control. One kept the ultraviolet lamp low and used it carefully. One covered with short bursts from behind a trailer. One tried to pull either a body or a heavy bundle clear of the open lane. Then an infected hit the shooter from behind. The lamp dropped, rolled under a frame, and cast violet light sideways through smoke and tires. The man with the lamp fired twice, grabbed the light, and backed toward the hard case without turning his back on the alley. That got my attention. He was hurt or exhausted, but he was working clean. He did not wave for help. He did not panic fire into empty dark. He checked lanes, controlled the light, and moved only when he had a reason. I raised the drone, widened the view, and checked the routes around the crash. Movement was rising from the north and west. The south approach stayed thinner, blocked by dumpsters and one half-open gate. That matched what I remembered. I looked at the map on the bench, then back at the live feed. If I moved fast, I could reach the south edge before the whole district turned into one loud funnel. If I sat and watched, the survivors, the case, and anything useful on that street would be gone by morning, burned, picked clean, or buried under bodies. I kept the drone over the wreck for another 10 seconds, maybe 15, and the whole scene got worse faster than I could have crossed half the distance to it. One of the fires under the center section reached something sealed in the cargo spill. The blast was not huge, but it was hard and bright and close enough to throw burning debris across the boulevard and into the side of a trailer. A second later, another pop went off farther back, then a rolling burst from what looked like small cylinders or stored pressure bottles cooking off in sequence. The men coming in from the north scattered at once. One dropped flat behind a car. Another ran the wrong way and cut straight into open pavement. The man with the ultraviolet lamp lost his cover when the bent sheet metal shifted and dropped. He grabbed the hard case by one handle, dragged it 2 feet, then let it go when movement hit the lane from the west. The sound from the blast carried across the district and woke every loose body in range. I saw shapes turn in side alleys, under loading docks, in warehouse mouths, under a box truck, along a fence line. It was all moving toward the same point now, and it was moving fast enough that anyone trying to leave on foot had a closing window measured in seconds, not minutes. I backed off the loading ramp in my head before I ever left the building. The south route had looked workable on the map. It was done now. Too much open pavement near the wreck, too many unknown people converging from different angles, and the return would have been worse. Night was already falling into the streets. Firelight makes distance look cleaner than it is, but it also throws every moving shadow into sharp contrast. A man crossing back through that district with a loaded case, a dog, and no full view of the alleys would have to get lucky more than once. I do not build plans on luck. I pulled the drone higher, widened the orbit, and watched one of the north side scavengers try to make a break for the cargo lane. He got halfway there, slipped on something in the street, and vanished under 3 rushing shapes before he even got back to his knees. The man with the lamp ducked behind the rear ramp, lost sight of the hard case, and the white-violet glow cut out completely. No signal from him after that. No hand flash. No clean line of movement. I had no way to know if he was pinned, hit, or already gone. I shut the cabinet, resafed the gear I had laid out, and started putting it back in the order I trust. Carbine on the wall rack, smoke back in the locker, bolt cutters under the bench, radio clipped to the charger. I left the chest rig packed and my sidearm on my belt. Once something that big hits the district, the problem does not stay at the crash. Sound pushes people and infect it out in waves. The first wave runs toward it. The second wave runs away from it. The third wave is what leaks into the blocks around me after the easy routes clog and the fires start driving movement in strange directions. I needed the building ready, not an outside route half-packed for a run I was no longer taking. Bailey watched me from beside the bench, quiet and locked in. She had already shifted from travel mode to hold mode. She knew I had made the decision. When I move toward the armory and then start restowing gear, she settles. That dog learns patterns faster than most people I used to know. I killed the idea of going out that night and replaced it with work. First, I widened the drone's orbit to cover 4 blocks around the wreck instead of just the crash lane. Then I switched the monitor wall to split feeds and gave the outside cameras more real estate than the lower floor interiors. If the crash started spilling trouble outward, I wanted to catch it before it got close. After that, I went up to the roof with the spotting scope, 1 spare battery, and a folded blanket pad for the parapet. From up there, I had line of sight to the fire columns, the glow along the boulevard, and the darker service streets feeding into it. The city looked like it had been punched in one section and was trying to absorb the hit without tearing all the way through. More gunfire broke out north of the wreck, not organized, mostly panic or men firing to clear lanes that had already closed. A separate burst came from a rooftop farther west, maybe some holdout taking opportunistic shots into the mess. Then, one whole block went bright when the fire reached a line of stored pallets or insulation inside a loading warehouse. The light was enough to show bodies moving in hard bursts between trailers and fencing. I stayed on the roof until the cold started numbing my trigger finger through the glove. The crash site changed every few minutes. The center section burned harder, then dimmed when part of the roof above it collapsed and buried the hottest part under brick and steel. The tail area lit up when fuel or hydraulic fluid found a new path. Men kept arriving in small groups from different sides of the industrial strip. Some came with intent. Some came with bags and lights, hoping to get lucky on the edges. None of them held ground for long. The infected were not one clean wave. They came in strings, pauses, then sudden bursts when a light cut the wrong doorway, or a weapon cracked too close to a sheltered loading lane. By full dark, the whole zone around the crash was no longer something a careful man could enter, do a job, and leave. It was a trap made of noise, blocked routes, and other people making bad choices in clusters. I knew better than to pretend I could fix that with one good run and a clean route home. I took the scope down, sealed the roof hatch, and went to the radio table. The scanner had been quiet except for static and short human bursts drowned under interference. I started stepping through the military bands I had programmed months earlier, not with any belief that I would suddenly hear a command post handing out clear instructions, but because big aircraft do not fall out of the sky carrying nothing. On the third sweep, I caught a repeating tone under the noise. Not voice, not random carrier bleed. A pulse, then a short pause, then the same pulse again, low and flat, repeating on a narrow frequency. I switched the scanner to hold and brought in the directional antenna line from the window bracket. The signal rose enough to separate itself from the hiss. A locator ping, simple, automatic. No voice header, no encryption burst I could hear, no spoken call sign, just a steady beacon. I wrote the frequency down, checked the compass heading on the directional mount, and found the strongest angle. East-northeast from my building, right on the crash district. That changed the problem, but not enough to send me out blind in the dark. A live locator beacon means somebody wants that site found, or somebody was supposed to come for what got left behind. It also means every man with a halfway decent scanner inside range will eventually hear it if he knows where to search. If the signal stayed live for long, the crash would keep pulling armed traffic even after the fires died down. That traffic would not stay neatly inside one boulevard. It would spread block by block, checking rooftops, windows, service roads, loading bays, and any building that offered height or concealment. My building had survived 1 year largely by being quiet, dark, and uninteresting from the outside. A standing beacon in the next district meant a new center of gravity had just opened 3 or 4 blocks away. That was a future problem, not an immediate green light. I still did not know what had gone down, who had survived, or whether anyone left at that wreck knew enough to start looking outward. I set a rotation for the night and kept moving. 1 hour on the roof with the scope, 15 minutes at the monitor wall, 10 minutes on the scanner, 5 minutes walking the 6th and 7th floors to make sure the familiar sounds stayed familiar. I fed Bailey again early to keep her calm and left her mat near the workshop bench where she could see me from either the radio table or the monitors. Around midnight, I caught 3 men on the South Alley camera 2 blocks away moving west fast. One with a limp, one without a coat, one carrying a duffel low and awkward. They were not heading for me. They were getting away from the crash zone and trying to put walls between themselves and whatever they had stirred up. 5 minutes later, the service road camera picked up 2 infected crossing north, where I had seen none there all evening. 10 minutes after that came the first sign that the spill was reaching my side of the district in force. The 5th floor trip net stayed quiet, but the 2nd floor lane mic picked up a scrape at the outer lobby barrier, then a second, then a series of light taps against metal from something pressing in and backing away. I switched that feed full screen and watched one older infected push through the front debris field, get hung up on the mesh, and thrash long enough to bring 2 more shapes in from the sidewalk. I did not waste ammunition on them from above. The front barrier had been built to absorb that exact kind of pressure. One body caught in wire becomes an obstacle for the next. 2 or 3 pressing at bad angles jam the entry tighter. They would work loose or fall quiet. My concern was not 3 infected at the lobby. It was whether the crash would turn the whole block into a passing route for the next few hours. I armed the north parapet ultraviolet floods from the roof panel and left them cold but ready. I brought the 3rd floor sentry lane out of passive and confirmed the corridor camera was still clean. Then, I went down to the 6th floor west slot and watched the service road through the narrow opening with the carbine across the sill. A pair of men crossed at a trot 20 minutes later, neither looking at my windows, both focused west. One was carrying a long case. The other had a handlight taped to his wrist and used it only in quick cuts at ground level. They did not stop. Good. Men in a hurry are safer at a distance than men who start studying buildings. The first night dragged itself out in fragments. A burst of noise from the crash district. Silence. Then a separate crack of weapons farther off. One scream that stopped fast. A flare of fire where something structural gave way. The locator ping never stopped. Every time I checked the held frequency, it was there. Steady, patient, stupid. By 2 in the morning, the worst of the immediate surge seemed to be past. The crash still burned in spots, but the open fighting had thinned. The bigger problem had spread out. The infected were now drifting through the industrial lanes in wider numbers, no longer locked on the exact impact point but moving along sound and light trails left by the men who had rushed in. That was what I expected. A major event in the city never stays where it starts. It ripples. The people who survive the center drag danger outward with them. By the time the horizon started paling, I had counted movement on 7 separate blocks that had been quiet the evening before. At first light I shut the roof hatch, blacked out the east observation slit, and got 4 hours of sleep on the cot in the 7th floor room with the radio volume turned low enough to wake me if the held frequency changed. When I got up, the first thing I did was check the crash zone through the drone feed. I had rotated the quad back twice during the night for battery changes and short-range visual checks over my own block, but the fixed wing was the better tool for a daytime pass. I hand-launched it from the roof under the grey morning sky and sent it wide over the industrial strip with a slower, quieter approach. In daylight, the wreck looked different, more dead, less dramatic. The fires had burned down to black smoke and orange pockets under twisted sections of metal and roof debris. The boulevard around the midsection was clogged with burned-out cars, dropped bags, loose cargo, and bodies. The rear section still had access lanes, but not good ones. The hard case was no longer visible where I had last seen it. That did not tell me much. It could be under fallen sheet metal, dragged into shadow, or already moved. I did not see organized military recovery. I did not see trucks, marked teams, or a secure perimeter. What I saw instead was a district in the ugly middle stage after a high-value event. Smoke, scattered scavengers testing edges from cover, 2 isolated rooftop watchers, infected drifting through the easier lanes and collecting under overhangs where the sunlight stayed weak. One body in a helmet near the rear cargo ramp, another in partial body armor by a trailer, a third figure moving carefully inside the broken shell of the produce warehouse office that the nose section had punched into. That one stayed inside shadow and never stepped fully into view. I circled again. Same result. Somebody was alive in there, or something was moving in a way I did not want to misread. Either way, it was not my job on the first morning to run out and solve it. I needed information, not a body count. Day 1 after the crash became an observation day. I cleaned the soot and moisture off the rooftop panels, checked the rain catch valves, and kept the scanner on hold while I worked. The locator ping stayed live. I rigged the larger directional antenna to a better mount and took 3 separate heading checks from different points in the building to narrow the source. The strongest line stayed consistent with the rear crash section, a little south of center. That told me the beacon was not from the nose section or some surviving radio mast in the warehouse office. It was near the cargo area, close to where I had seen the hard case. That was useful. The second useful thing came around noon. 2 men moved into the crash district from the west in better order than the scavenger crews I had seen the night before. Dark clothes, small packs, no wasted light. One carrying what looked like a compact ultraviolet lamp on a sling. Not military at first glance, but trained enough to think in lanes instead of running straight at what they wanted. They spent 15 minutes checking the outer alleys, then went in low behind the trailer line near the rear section. I kept the drone over them and watched their method. They did not loot open cargo. They did not stop for the easy medical spill. They moved to one spot, checked another, then doubled back. That told me they were not hunting general supplies. They were looking for something specific. Maybe the beacon, maybe the case, maybe a person. They reached the rear section, vanished under the shadow of bent metal and broken dock structure, and stayed out of sight for almost 6 minutes. When one of them came back into view, he was empty-handed. The other did not come out with him. The man who returned moved faster on the exit than he had on entry and kept checking behind him. He made it 2 alleys west, then froze, raised his light once, and fired into the dark under a loading overhang. He did not wait for the result. He ran. He got out of my sightline beyond the rail cut. The second man never reappeared. The beacon kept pinging. Whatever they wanted, they had not shut it down. That told me enough to harden my patience. If trained men could enter the edge of the rear section in daylight and come out one short, then the site was still too hot, too unstable, or both. I spent the rest of that afternoon working the building and expanding my notes. I drew 3 updated routes to the crash instead of the single fast route I had considered the night before. 1 rooftop heavy, 1 alley heavy, 1 mixed with 2 fallback loops if any lane clogged. I marked the new infected congregation points I had seen since dawn. The old machine shop lot, the service underpass near the rail berm, the box trailer row on the north side of the boulevard, the collapsed loading bay where the West group had fired on the first night. I also marked human traffic. The crash had created a small migration of scavenger movement toward that district, then away from it. Most of those people were now choosing loops that cut around the worst blocks. Some of those loops grazed my side of the map. That mattered more to me than whatever dramatic scene was still sitting at the center. Danger near home stays on the board longer than danger 3 blocks out. The second night brought the first direct consequence. A little after dark, 2 men tried my front approach. Not a full push, not a serious breach, a test. I caught them on the pinhole lens at the lobby before they reached the outer barrier. One stood off to the side and watched the windows. The other came closer, tapped the welded mesh with a tool, waited, then tapped again. He was not checking if anyone was home. He was checking whether the sound pulled infected from the sidewalk or the neighboring lots. He wanted to know if my building could be used as temporary shelter or stripped for parts later. I let him work for 10 seconds, then dumped 1 remote noise trap from the far side of the lobby into the opposite corner from where he stood. The clatter echoed hard in the confined space. He jumped back. His partner swung his light toward the noise, and both men saw the old infected body still snared in the inner wire from the first night shift, and moving again from the sound. They left fast after that, not running, but fast enough to show they had no interest in finding out what else inside could move. I did not sleep much that second night. The beacon kept working. That was the part I could not ignore. Men were already sampling surrounding buildings. If the crash site remained an active signal source, the traffic would not stop. It would settle into a pattern, and patterns are when the careful ones start noticing things. A greenhouse roof that stays intact. A building with no random window breaks. No visible looting on lower floors. No smoke from bad fires. A quiet block that looks too clean. I have stayed alive by looking dead enough from a distance and dangerous enough up close. A live beacon nearby makes that balance harder to keep. By dawn on day 2 after the crash, I had stopped asking whether I would eventually have to move. The question had shifted to when the window would be real and whether the value at the site would still justify the trip. The morning of day 2 gave me one more piece. Snow started late and light, more grit than storm at first, blowing from the lakeside in sharp bands. That helped me. Snow quiets a district in stages. Not fully. It shortens sightlines, cools surface fires, dampens sound a little, and makes men with weak gear stay inside longer. It also shows tracks. I sent the fixed wing out low and slow over the crash lanes and found fresh human movement around the rear section. A group of 3 had been there before dawn, judging by the tracks cutting through the dusted pavement and the disturbed ash line near the cargo spill. They had not stayed. The rear ramp area showed a shifted panel and one moved crate. The hard case was still not visible. Then I found something better than a visual. The ping changed. Not the frequency, the interval. It skipped one beat, then resumed. 23 seconds, then one skip, then 23 again. Not random drift. A programmed pattern, or a damaged transmitter changing state. I wrote the interval down and listened through 2 full cycles. Same result. The unit was still alive, but something about it was degrading. I know electronics well enough to respect what that meant. A healthy locator unit on a protected power source does not start skipping in a regular damaged rhythm unless the casing is compromised, the antenna path is fouled, or the internal system is failing over to a lower state. That gave the beacon a timer, even if I did not know the length of it. If it died on its own, one problem solved itself, and the crash district lost some of its pull. If it kept degrading but stayed audible, that could be worse. Intermittent signals make men stubborn. They think the prize is right there and slipping away. They dig harder. They spread wider. They take more chances. Day 2 became another full day of waiting, but it was not passive waiting. I cleaned and tested the larger quad, packed a more realistic outside load, and staged it without wearing it. I also set 2 additional defensive layers inside the building. One directional charge on the second floor funnel corner, wired but safed. One smoke dump above the lobby if I needed to blind a stair push. I do not like armoring my own hallways with more than I have to, but if the crash had already started drawing curious men toward me, I needed the lower floors meaner than usual. That afternoon, I finally saw the first proof that someone from the aircraft had survived longer than a few minutes. It came through the scope, not the drone. A brief flash from the upper office shell where the nose section had gone in. Not sunlight. Wrong angle. It came again 4 minutes later, low and narrow, as if someone was shielding a signal lamp with a hand or cloth. I watched for 20 minutes and got nothing else. Then, right before dusk, it came a third time, this time from a different window cavity in the same broken office shell. Not a random reflection, a human doing one careful thing with whatever battery or light he still had. I did not know if it was a signal meant for rescue, a check on line of sight, or a man with a flashlight trying to cross the room. I did know one thing. If he had lasted into day 2 inside that shell, he either had discipline, luck, or a sealed pocket around him. That made the sight more complicated. The living draw the desperate draw attention draws more bodies. I wrote the window positions down and kept watching until dark buried the office shell in shadow. The second night stayed quieter on my block, louder closer to the crash. That was better for me, and worse for anybody trapped over there. Around midnight, I heard a short run of automatic fire from the boulevard, then a separate burst from farther north, then nothing for almost an hour. Bailey woke once and stood near the east window, but her fur stayed flat and she settled after I checked the cameras. The locator signal kept skipping 1 beat every cycle. No change beyond that. I lay on the cot in my boots with the sidearm on the crate beside me and let the radio do the keeping. That kind of sleep is shallow, but it counts. When I got up on day 3, the first thing I noticed was the change in the crash smoke. Much less. The heavy burn had finished most of its easy fuel. That was good. Fire no longer owned the site. That meant access would improve. It also meant the last cover of confusion was thinning out. Day 3 was the first day I considered leaving the building before I talked myself out of it with a clean list. The weather was cold but stable. Visibility was better. The fires were down. Human traffic into the district had slowed. Those are the facts that make a man start reaching for straps and magazines. Then I checked the rest of the list. The office shell light had flashed again before dawn. That meant at least one live unknown remained. The rear beacon still pinged, which meant the prize at the site was active enough to keep attracting others. Fresh tracks on the drone feed showed a new 4-man movement from the west side. My own front block had seen 2 curious men the night before. The route home after an afternoon run would still carry me close to dusk if anything took longer than planned. And dusk is when the district turns mean. The answer stayed no. I swore at the wall once, quietly, and put the packed rig back on the bench. Waiting on day 3 paid for itself before noon. 2 men and 1 woman entered the rear section from the south alley, better equipped than most of the scavengers I had seen. but not disciplined enough to move in silence. They brought one bright work light, one compact ultraviolet lamp, and a rolling cart. The cart told me they expected weight. That meant they had some idea what they were after. I shadowed them with the drone until they reached the rear ramp lane. They moved panels. They checked under the fallen section. They found something. I could not see what from my angle, but all three bent over the same point near where the hard case had last been. Then the woman stood and shook her head. One of the men raised the ultraviolet lamp toward the rear ramp opening, and something came out of the dark there hard enough to knock him backward over the cart. He lost the lamp. The second man fired straight into the ramp cavity, too fast, too close. The woman ran for the south alley. She made it halfway before two infected hit her from the side lane by the broken dock wall. The first man got up and ran the other way. The second kept firing until the slide locked back. After that, he disappeared under the ramp edge and never came back into view. That was the moment I stopped thinking of the rear section as one clean pickup point and started treating it as a layered site with at least one enclosed danger pocket still active. The rear ramp area had enough shadow, metal, and partial seal to hold bodies out of the weather. Anything trapped in there would stay stronger than the ones shambling in the open. If a fresh infected or a wounded survivor had turned inside that cavity and been left boxed in with partial shelter, anyone reaching under the metal would meet it at arm's length. That explained why the trained West Side team on day 1 had come out one short. It explained why the cart team on day 3 found something and failed to remove it. It also told me the beacon was likely close enough to that cavity that shutting it down might require working in exactly the worst place on the site. Good information, not pleasant, but real. I updated the map, added the rear ramp cavity as a hot zone, and stopped looking for an easy version of the trip. The trigger that forced my hand came late on day 3, and it had nothing to do with saving anyone at the crash. It came from my own radio table. Right after sunset, the locator ping changed again. This time it did more than skip a beat. After the 23rd pulse, a short burst of digital noise rode under the carrier and spilled onto a nearby civilian emergency band I use for passive scanning. Then it repeated. Not a voice call, not a clear code I could read by ear. A short burst, narrow, sharp. The kind of thing a damaged unit can do when shielding fails or an antenna lead starts throwing interference onto adjacent frequencies. I checked the scanner. Same thing. Then I checked the old receiver I keep isolated for local line tests. Same bleed. That mattered for one plain reason. If I could hear the spill on cheaper civilian gear inside my building, then anyone nearby with a scavenge scanner or even a half-working emergency set could hear it too. The beacon was no longer a hidden technical signal. It had started ringing a bell loud enough for amateurs. That would pull a new kind of traffic. Not the cautious men testing the edges. Not the one-off looters grabbing loose medical packs. It would pull every fool with a radio and a story about military cargo. Some would come at night. More would come in daylight. They would search outward when the center failed them. Rooftops first. Taller structures next. Any building with clear line of sight to the crash would start getting attention. Mine was one of the best perches in the district. I could no longer leave the beacon to rot and hope the problem solved itself. If the signal lasted another day or two, my block would stop being a quiet side route and become part of the outer search ring. That changed the balance enough to commit. I still did not move that night. Night travel back through a newly stirred search zone is how careful men disappear. But I set the plan in motion. I packed for a single objective. No side scavenging. No extra weight, no rescue. Go to the crash. Reach the rear section. Confirm the beacon source. Shut it down if possible. Recover the case if the weight and route still made sense. Leave before the afternoon shift of bad decisions hit the district. I chose the 4th morning after the crash for the move, and I chose it for practical reasons, not nerves. The weather report I made from the sky and the wind line said a short, hard snowband would pass through by late morning. That would do 3 things for me. It would keep casual scavengers inside longer. It would soften sound a little underfoot. It would cut sightlines without turning the route into a full blind stumble. I needed enough cover to move and enough visibility to avoid stepping into the rear ramp cavity half-sighted. I spent the last hours of night checking every piece of gear in the exact order I planned to use it. Short carbine, suppressed, 3 loaded magazines on the rig and 1 in the gun. Sidearm with 2 spares. 1 smoke grenade, not 2. I wanted less bulk. 1 compact ultraviolet baton. 1 folding pry bar. 1 short hook pull strapped along the pack side so I could move debris or test under the ramp without putting my arm into a blind gap. Bolt cutters. Lockpicks. 2 signal mines to cover a retreat lane if I needed to block a stairwell or alley behind me on the return. Med roll. Water. High-calorie bars. Bailey's harness, boots and working lead. Before dawn, I walked the building 1 full time. Roof, 6th, 7th, then down to the 3rd floor sentry lane and back. The directional charge in the 2nd floor funnel stayed safed but wired. The lobby smoke dump was armed. The 4th floor decoy audio stayed off. No point advertising presence while I was gone. I left 1 timed radio clip set to kick on near midday from a distant room on the 5th floor, so that if anyone sampled the building while I was out, the apparent life would seem lower and farther in than my real upper levels. I also set the larger quad drone on standby at the 6th floor launch slot with a pre-planned route to my first fallback point. If I had to break from the crash site and lose visual on a lane, I could send the quad ahead from the tablet and check the next corner before exposing myself. I wrote the date, the departure time, the objective, and the first fallback route in the notebook and slid it into the metal tray by the radio table. Then, I clipped Bailey's lead, put my hand on the workshop door, and stood there for 1 full second listening to the building breathe. The city was quieter on the 4th morning, but not calm. There is a difference. Quiet means less movement. Calm means no pressure building behind what you cannot see. I went down through the lift cage after sending it empty first, then cutting the power at the lower vestibule exactly as always. The service corridor smelled the same as every other bad day. Damp, rust, dust, cold. I cracked the alley panel and checked the lane. Fresh snow had started, fine and dry, blowing low. No footprints right outside the breach. Good. I took the back route along my fence line, cut south first instead of east, then looped toward the service road to throw off any man who might have been watching my more obvious exits. Bailey stayed close and low. Her booted feet made almost no sound on the gritty snow. At the first corner she stopped on her own, nose out, then looked back at me. I waited with her and listened. A loose chain knocking somewhere far off. Nothing closer. We moved. The 4th day route was slower than the route I would have tried on the first night, and that was by design. I stayed off the most direct rooftop line, too exposed if anyone had started watching higher structures. Instead, I used the shell of the tire shop only for the first cut, then dropped earlier into the service alleys and moved through interior gaps in dead buildings where I had options to freeze and listen before each exit. The snow helped. It dulled the edges of bright surfaces and made open lots less inviting to the casual eye. It also told me a lot. I found 1 recent 3-man set heading north away from the crash, 1 pair of older tracks half filled in leading toward the boulevard, and 1 single line of careful boot prints that stopped at the back of a machine shop and did not come out the other side. That sort of sign keeps a man honest. It means there are still active pockets and still people making choices in the same grid I am using. I did not rush. I took the next corner only after I had a reason to believe it was there for me to take. Halfway in, I saw the first direct sign that the beacon spill had already widened the search ring. A rooftop 2 blocks west of the crash had a fresh lookout nest. Not permanent. 2 sandbags, a broken office chair, and 1 tarp edge tied down against a vent stack. Somebody had started using height. That was enough proof for me. Waiting a 5th day might have made the route cleaner in one sense, but it would also have given other people more time to turn the whole district into a layered hunt. I eased back off that sight line, sent the standby quad up from the tablet once I had enough cover between walls, and let it peek the next service intersection. Clear of people. 2 infected under an overhang on the north side, both facing away, snow collecting on their shoulders. I stayed south, crossed the loading cut, and reached the last warehouse shell before the crash district proper without putting a single shot into the air. From the broken 2nd floor office of that warehouse, I got my first close daylight view of the wreck since the plane came down. The smoke was light now. The rear section sat blackened and half buried under fallen dock structure and bent sheet metal. The boulevard was a dead field of abandoned attempts. Bags, carts, dropped tools, burned patches, bodies in bad positions, and scattered supplies that no longer tempted me. The nose section office shell still had one intact inner room behind the torn front wall. I checked the window where I had seen the light flashes on day 2. No movement. No new signal. The rear beacon, though, was strong enough on the handheld that I no longer needed the big antenna to confirm the direction. I could hear it with the scanner clipped to my rig, a steady tone under the hiss, skipping one beat every cycle and spitting that brief digital spill every so often. I did not see men in the open. That was good. I did not assume that meant the site was empty. That would have been a fast way to make a bad last turn. I settled in and watched for almost 20 minutes before moving the final block. That patience paid off. A man appeared near the north side trailers, looked toward the rear ramp, then backed out of sight again without advancing. He was testing the same idea I was, and not liking what he saw. 10 minutes later, another shape moved inside the nose office shell, low and slow, too controlled to be a drifting infected. A survivor was still in there, or someone had made that shell a temporary blind. I marked both points mentally and shifted focus back to the rear section. The hot zone was the rear ramp cavity under the bent dock structure. That was where 3 teams had failed or lost men. That was where the beacon was likely pinned. My plan changed right there. No straight push into the cargo lane. I would approach the rear section from the south, use the low dock wall for cover, clear the cavity from the side angle if possible, and only then decide whether the case could be moved. If the case was wedged too deep, or the cavity held more than one active threat, I would shut the beacon down in place and leave the rest. I moved Bailey into a tight recessed utility nook inside the warehouse shell and clipped her lead to a floor pipe. I gave her the stay signal and a piece of dried meat, then left the quad on a short hover to watch the north trailer lane while I made the last crawl alone. I do not like separating from her, but the final approach had too many pinch points and blind angles under metal where a dog could get forced into the wrong lane. She held. No sound. No pulling. I slid down the interior stair, crossed the snow-dusted loading yard one shadow at a time, and came up behind the broken south dock wall that gave me partial cover from the rear section. The beacon was loud enough now that the handheld speaker did not need my ear close to it. Tone, pause, tone, skip. Then, after several cycles, that short burst of digital spill again. I could place it within a few yards, maybe less, somewhere under the collapsed metal and dock structure just left of the half-open ramp. I stayed low and used the hook pole before I used my hands. First, I dragged a loose sheet of corrugated metal away from the side lane to clear my view of the ground. Then I tested a hanging strip of wrecked panel that could have dropped noise if brushed. Then I angled the pole under the edge of the bent dock sheet closest to the ramp cavity and pulled once. Light. Just enough to disturb whatever was inside without committing my arm or head to the opening. No immediate rush. No grab. No sound beyond the ping and the soft hiss of snow hitting hot metal somewhere deeper in the wreck. I waited, counted to 20, pulled again, harder. Something shifted inside and knocked once against metal. Not a body throwing itself at the gap. More like loose cargo, hanging structure, or a limb brushing debris as weight redistributed. I brought the ultraviolet baton into my left hand, kept the carbine in my right, and widened my angle by 6 inches at a time until I could get the violet beam into the cavity without exposing my face to it. The first sweep of ultraviolet light showed me why the site had held men up for days. The rear ramp had partially folded when the aircraft twisted, leaving a narrow crawl-height gap under a wedge of cargo netting, bent ramp plate, and dock debris. Inside that cramped pocket were 2 bodies tangled in gear and strap webbing, one in partial flight gear, one in dark clothing without a helmet. The one in dark clothing had turned and jammed itself half under a crate, one arm pinned, but the head and shoulders free enough to lunge at anything reaching past the edge. The other body was dead weight, trapped face down under a section of net and metal, not moving. The turned one recoiled from the ultraviolet beam and dragged backward into the small space it had left, clawing at the floor with more speed than the open-air ones I had been watching all week. Fresh enough, sheltered enough, mean in a tight lane. A man reaching in blind for the case or the transmitter would have put his forearm right into that thing's mouth. I did not fire into the cavity unless I had to. Sound in that dock lane would travel. I held the ultraviolet beam steady with my left hand, used the hook pole to snag the loose cargo netting, and pulled the strap bundle toward me inch by inch until the turned body lost its backward shelter and had to expose more of its torso to avoid the light. It snapped forward once, then jerked back hard when the beam stayed on its face and chest. That gave me enough room to angle the carbine low and put 2 suppressed rounds into the upper chest and shoulder line, not for drama, only to break its drive long enough to get the head clear of the crate edge. After that, I drove the hook pole across the throat and pinned it long enough to shift the beam and put one close shot where it would stop movement cleanly. The whole exchange took less than 10 seconds. The loudest sound was the metal settling after I shifted the net. I froze at once and listened. No footsteps. No voices. The north lane stayed quiet on the quad feed. With the lane clear, the rest of the cavity made sense. The hardened case was there, jammed under the rear edge of the crate, and one bent ramp strut, half obscured by the dead man in flight gear. The beacon source was not the case itself. It was a compact locator unit clipped to the case handle on a short armored tether, probably meant to keep the package trackable even if the main electronics were shielded or powered down. That was why the signal had stayed live even with the case buried. The locator housing had taken heat and impact, but not enough to die. I reached in with the hook pull, dragged the tether toward the edge, and got the locator close enough to inspect without putting my face into the pocket. The casing had cracked along one corner. One antenna fin was bent. The clip was intact. I could shut it down 2 ways: break the unit outright, or unclip and remove it. Breaking it in place would end the signal fast, but if the case stayed and other men later found the cavity, they would know something valuable had been here. Unclipping it and taking it would end the signal and give me proof of what I was dealing with. I chose the cleaner option. I cut the tether first. Then I unclipped the locator and wrapped it in the folded thermal pouch from my rig to muffle whatever it might keep transmitting during handling. The tone on my scanner changed at once, then dropped to weak static. Good. One problem off the board. Then I looked at the case again and made the next decision with the weight in mind. I tested it with the hook pole, then with one hand through the cleared gap. Heavy, but not impossible. Hard-sided, compact, denser than medical gear, lighter than ammunition cases. I cleared the dead man's sleeve out of the handle, braced my boots against the dock lip, and dragged the case 6 inches, then 12, then far enough to get both hands on it without going into the cavity deeper than my forearms. It scraped free with one hard jerk and came out onto the snow under the bent sheet metal. I pulled it behind the dock wall and checked the north lane again on the quad. Still clear, no voices, no new movement. The first hard part was done. The second hard part was getting back out before the silent window closed. I got back to Bailey by the same covered path I had used to reach the dock wall and found her exactly where I had left her, body tight, ears high, one paw lifted but held. I unclipped the lead, gave her the stay close signal, and stowed the locator deeper in the pack under a rag wrap so its broken edges would not snag anything on the move. The hard case went on a short drag strap behind me for the first stretch through the warehouse shell. I hated the sound of it on concrete, so I switched to a shoulder carry the moment I had enough room to stand. It was awkward and pulled my balance off center, but it was manageable. I did not wait to inspect it there. Inspection happens in controlled space, not in a shell with 3 sightlines and unknown eyes on the surrounding roofs. I sent the quad ahead to the service intersection, got a clear lane, then started the exit route in reverse, slower than I liked and faster than I wanted. The trouble started 1 block out, not at the wreck. That was exactly the sort of thing I planned for and still do not enjoy. I had just crossed the service cut behind the machine shop when Bailey stopped hard enough to pull the lead taut. She did not bark. She locked toward the 2nd-story loading gallery on the far wall and held. I dropped the case behind a rusted compressor housing, raised the carbine, and waited. A man moved at the gallery edge, not stepping out all the way, only enough to show the front of a dark jacket and one gloved hand on the rail. He had been watching the cut, maybe the crash, maybe my route. Maybe he had followed the same idea too late and chosen a perch to wait for the one person who got out with something. He never called out. Good. Men who talk from cover are trying to freeze you. Men who stay quiet are already deciding on angles. I put one suppressed round into the rail 6 inches from his hand and sent sparks and rust into his face. He dropped back fast. I did not wait for the second man who was almost certainly there. I popped one smoke can into the cut between us, dragged the case with both hands for 5 strides, then slung it again and moved. The return route turned into one long test of whether I had built enough margin into the plan. The smoke bought me the intersection. The snow kept lines of sight shorter than they would have been in clear air. The quad saved me once at the rail spur by showing 2 infected under the tire shop canopy before I stepped into their lane. Bailey saved me again at the ladder cage by refusing the first climb. I checked the upper rungs with the light held low and found a loose length of wire tied across chest height near the top, fresh and tight enough to catch a man carrying weight and throw him backward. Human trap, not infected mess. I cut it, changed my route, and skipped the ladder entirely. That cost me time. Time in the open is the tax for every good catch and every cautious choice. I paid it and kept moving, cutting through the lower machine room instead of going to the roof, then crossing the service road on a diagonal, where the parked salt truck gave me 1 extra second of cover halfway through. By the time I reached my alley breach, the snow had thickened, and the district had started to wake again, in the ugly way it does after a quiet morning. More movement, distant hammering from a building north of the rail cut. One shot somewhere west, a man shouting once, then no second shout. My own block looked clean, no fresh footprints at the hidden panel, no bodies at the fence line. I got the sheet metal breach open, brought Bailey through first, hauled the case inside, and sealed the panel behind us. Only then did I let the weight come off my shoulder and hit the concrete with a controlled drop. I kept the sidearm out while I moved the case through the service corridor and into the maintenance vestibule. Lift cage up empty first, then back down, same as always. Nothing fancy. No rushing the last safe step. A lot of people make it home and then stop thinking at the door. I do not. Not when the thing I went out for is finally in reach, and the building is the only place left where I control the angles. On the 6th floor, I locked the workshop door, set the case on the central bench, and stood there a moment with the scanner hissing beside it. No ping now, no skip, no digital spill. The whole district had just gone a little quieter, even if nobody out there knew it yet. Bailey circled once, drank half a bowl of water, and settled under the bench where she could keep one eye on me and one on the room. I stripped my gloves, checked my forearms for cuts, wiped the wet off the case shell, and looked over the latches. Hardened corners, heat scoring, government stencil half burned off, no obvious breach, no quick pry marks from other hands. Whatever had been in that rear ramp cavity for 4 days had stayed sealed. I took the locator unit out of the pack and set it in a metal tray by itself. The casing was cracked enough to show internal shielding and a compact battery block, still warm. That explained the persistence. Good power cell. Good enough engineering to stay alive through impact, fire, and weather. Good enough to drag every fool with a scanner into the district until I cut it loose. I did not open the case right away. First, I checked the outside cameras, then the roof, then the lower floors, then the radio bands, then the notebook, departure time, return time, beacon down, one likely observer on the gallery, one cut wire trap at the ladder cage, rear ramp cavity cleared. These details matter while they are fresh. If I skip the record and trust memory after a long run, I end up rewriting facts in my head to make myself look cleaner than I was. I do not need cleaner, I need accurate. After the notes, I set the case under the bench and left it there while I went down to the 3rd floor lane and made sure nothing had touched the building in my absence. The trip net stayed quiet. The sentry mount was green. The lobby barrier held. On the way back up, I stopped on the 5th floor and listened to the silence where the timed decoy radio had already cycled off. Good. No one had followed noise into the wrong room while I was gone. No one had tested the inner hall. Only then did I go back to the bench, sit down, and pull the case into the light. The latches were stiff but intact. I set the pry bar aside. No need to force a thing that still wants to open the right way. I checked for tamper wires, pressure pins, or secondary seals. Nothing obvious on the exterior. 2 keyed locks, already cracked at the face from impact. I used a pick on the first and a tension bar on the second. Both cylinders were damaged enough that finesse was less useful than patience. It took me 4 minutes to get the first to turn, and another 3 for the second. I broke the outer seal, lifted the lid 2 inches, stopped, and listened. No hiss, no pressure vent, no alarm tone. I opened it the rest of the way and looked inside. The foam insert held a compact field communications package. Not a crate of weapons, not a stack of medicine, and not anything a looter would have recognized at a glance unless he knew what he was seeing. One ruggedized control module with a fold-out screen. 2 encrypted handheld sets in shock sleeves. A hardened data drive canister locked in its own dock. Spare battery blocks. A small directional antenna pack. 1 paper folder sealed in a waterproof envelope. That explained the case weight and the live locator. This had been something worth tracking, but not something that would save a hungry neighborhood by itself. For me, though, it was worth the trip. Working communication gear and stored data changed the shape of choices. They tell a man where the next useful lie in the city is, and whether the people still talking are smart, desperate, or both. I closed the lid halfway, not from fear, only to contain the light while I worked the screen module out of its foam slot and set it on the bench. The module powered on with 1 hard press and a longer boot than I liked. Battery at 31%, internal storage protected. User access locked behind a system prompt I was not going to beat in 10 minutes by guessing. Fine, I am patient with machines. What mattered more at once was the hardware. Intact screen. No obvious board damage. Ports dry. Antenna connector clean. I set one of the spare battery blocks on the charger and opened the sealed paper envelope next. Inside was a short printed manifest, partly scorched at the edges but readable enough where it counted. Equipment serials. 1 route code. 1 transfer designation. 1 receiving station label I did not recognize. No plain English explanation of what had happened. Only the dry language of something moved in a hurry by people who expected handoff, not catastrophe. That fit the whole picture. A plane rerouted or forced down carrying comms gear and stored data. Not a rescue flight for civilians. Not a cure. Not a miracle. Just information, tools, and whatever orders had not died with the men carrying them. I sat back, rubbed the soot off my knuckles with a rag, and listened to the quiet where the locator ping had been for 4 days. The district outside was not safe. My block was not magically hidden again. Men had already started looking at roofs and windows in the outer ring. But the beacon was gone, and the center of that pull had ended on my bench. That bought me room, not peace. Room, enough to reset the building, study the gear, and decide whether the office shell survivor I had seen was still there, or whether another trip would be worth the risk. The crash had not given me answers in the clean way a man wants. It had done what the city always does now. It had broken open one section, spilled trouble into the next, and forced me to move only when waiting stopped being the safer choice. I took the locator unit off the tray, opened the cracked housing with a screwdriver, and disconnected the battery leads 1 at a time. Then, I shut the workshop door, locked it, and got to work on the module before the light outside shifted, and the next set of problems started moving. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you, what moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares, signing off.